want to preface this with, we're talking about documentaries, and so I have some ideas. There's no right or wrong. There's just how it sounds to you and how hopefully it will sound to others, which is our goal, of course. So I will share some stuff that's worked for me. I come from writing from my many years as a field reporter, where the whole point is to go and find out what somebody's thinking and how they're feeling and how they see things, and then basically write to that. And so I spent a lot of time doing that for news stories that were literally, a minute and a half, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, or then you get to documentaries, which are a lot longer. And so part of what you have to do, of course, is drive a lot of information in between clip. But, you don't want to waste time. You don't want to be redundant. And so every word, every second counts. And so I took that and I used it, in writing for the Fifth Estate, in writing for the documentaries I do now for radio. The other thing that we can talk about is that, you're not only telling a story, you're not only driving information, you're fixing things, because nothing, no matter what you plan, nothing is ever what you think it might be. And so I think it's a really important thing to remember to use what you have and who you have rather than who you thought they might be. I always use the example, this is a television example, but I remember doing a story on the modeling business for the Fifth Estate, and we were actually, there were nefarious things going on. But I had said to the person I was working with, how do you think we would open this? And they said, well, I see the model walking down the streets of New York with a dog. And I said, does she have a dog? And he said, all models have dogs. Well, the model didn't have a dog. And so, that's always happens because, you can line up an interview and you go and you think, oh my God, we're going to get this. And then they open their mouth and they give you something else. And what we have to remember is we're not trying to make them be who we want them to be. We're trying to reflect who they are. So the first tape we're going to play for you, I'll just give you a little bit of background. This is a story that started our Project Money last year. We needed a documentary to start our whole series on Project Money. And we had actually a documentary in train with somewhere else in the country that suddenly fell through 2 weeks before the launch of our program. And we started fishing immediately, looking for, what we were looking for were, because we knew these people existed, were people who won a lottery and what it did and how it changed things. And as I say, the people that we had in train went AWOL on us. And the producer who was working on that suddenly didn't have a doc anymore. And we needed to turn something around fast, and we found a man named Bob Erb in Terrace, BC. And literally, again, we're talking about the realities of a show where the host has come back and is working on stuff. We've got producers, and we're trying to get all of this stuff together suddenly. And literally in 2 days, we get on a plane and we go to Terrace. Someone has talked to him ahead of time for us, not the producer who I was going to work with, who is Liz Houth in BC. She was going to meet me in Terrace. And anyway, so we knew that Bob Erb was an interesting guy, that he had won a lot of money, and that he had this side interest in legalizing marijuana. And the note actually said, get him started on the marijuana thing and he'll just keep going. But there's another story there. And so we get there, and Bob Erb has won he's won something like $26 million, and he's handing it out to all sorts of people. And he really does care about legalizing marijuana. He smokes joints all the way through our interviews with him. And he tends to riff. And we walked out of several hours with him, and Liz said to me, oh my God, I'm not sure we've got like a full thing to deal with. What are we going to do? And I said to her, we're going to write around him. We're literally going to write around him, because he is an interesting guy and he's very worthy, but he's not everybody speaks in the clip you need. So the first clip we're going to play for you is a little bit of that. And in the end, of course, Bob Erb is a fascinating guy, and he was very worthy, and he was actually easier to write to than you would think. So let's hear Bob Erb.
There was probably 4 million In 3 weeks that was distributed. The Hospital Auxiliary, 20,000. The Hospice Society, 20,000. The Legion.
Bob Erb has given away millions in the last 10 months.
Salvation Army, 20,000.
We meet in his driveway.
I'm Anna Maria.
Bob Erb.
Really nice to meet you.
This is where I've been for 23 years. I subdivided.
He's standing there smoking, a trim 60-something. His words are spilling
young
out.
Couple I raised two. That's a trailer in addition.
There's a buzz of activity around his house. It looks roomy, not opulent, a split level. He's got a silver Airstream and a new white Cadillac SUV parked there. A few guys are unloading lumber. He's building a wheelchair ramp for a friend with ALS.
$10,000 check, so we received 3 $10,000 checks, 20 for the construction and then 10 for Christmas.
He's got so much to tell me he barely takes a breath. He's gesturing at his neighbors' houses.
I said, well, I can't pave my huge driveway and not their small one, and so we've prepped and are doing their driveway as well.
But I'm distracted. I'm asking myself, is that a joint he's smoking?
I'm a 15-joint fella. I've been smoking pot for 43 years. I use it as a preventative medicine. Like, why wait till you get sick before you start taking your medicine? I sort of view it as like taking a multivitamin every day, except I take 15 of them. Right from about 4:30 in the morning, I smoke my first joint and until about 10 o'clock at night.
He's wearing a T-shirt emblazoned with a marijuana leaf. Fight the deficit, it says. Legalize it. It seems Bob Erb is a philanthropist with a predisposition for pot. But more about that later.
It's funny, somebody wrote and said I was making fun of him. I wasn't making fun of him, but he's an interesting guy, and he's kind of funny because, you don't expect to go interview a guy and he's like, you want a joint? He kept offering us joints. At one point, I'm sitting on the coffee table near him so that, Liz has got the microphone and I can be closer to him to talk, and he says to me, you're going to have marijuana leaves all over your butt because there's marijuana all over the table, right? So it's, but he's a really generous guy, and he literally gave away millions. He called all the relatives he knew into, like, he flew them in, he gave them big fat checks, he showed us like piles of letters where people were, because once they get wind of it, right, like, oh, I'm a friend of your cousin, you gave her money, please give me money. He showed me letters, that he gave somebody money and they said, could you give me more? And he talked about, some of these people I'm sure are hoaxers, but you know what, if out of 15 people, 2 are hoaxers, then 13 people needed the money, and why shouldn't I give it to him? I mean, the guy was really extraordinary. And then we met some of the people that he knew in his community in Terrace who, he called them up and he said, go to this dealer, you're going to get a car, you have to spend $50,000, you have to have it all loaded up with everything, you get to pick, but no less than 50 grand. And he did all these wonderful things for people, and we had somebody crying saying, no one's ever given me anything new in my life, So it's a wonderful story of a man in this little town who just gives money. And, he has invested some of it, but anyway. So our challenge was, what do you do with somebody, and you heard him, he just talks, that's very much him, right? And so what you can do with that is you write around him, and you use the clip, you fade it up and down. And in between there, you have gold. And so in writing to clip, part of writing to clip is knowing what you have and knowing what your story is, and then adjusting with that story as you move forward in putting that documentary together. I'm old school. I transcribe everything. And we literally went through hours of tape. We sat there and I, you guys often have to work alone. I'm the host of The Current. I get a producer to work with me in the field who does, a lot of the dirty work too of mixing everything and putting it all together. But we really do work together on this stuff. And so in writing this thing, we just, you go back and forth with sound. How can you use it? How do you keep on going? One of the things I like to do with clip is when I'm writing, I've got the transcript there, and I'm looking at how it flows, and so that it should be seamless. And then when we start to record it, you listen again, and if you have to change the script, you change it again. If you have great lines, but they sound weird with the clip, you lose the line. You don't lose the clip. You you adjust to the clip, and it's like a living, breathing thing, so you keep working with it. And so as I'm writing, I think some of that stuff, you put it out on, you put out some of the the scripts? Oh, you haven't yet. Okay. If you look at my scripts, you will see that I write with a lot of ellipses. I write in phrases. I don't write in sentences because we talk in phrases. And I don't ever write in full sentences right across the page. I write in little short bursts. And I do that for reasons so that it keeps moving, right? And so if I'm moving, the clip is moving. And so hopefully what you hear there is a little bit of that seamless back and forth, back and forth. He comes in, I come in. He comes in, I come in. And I also change my tone to match what I'm doing. So this is about Bob Erb, who's the guy who smokes 15 joints a day and is a philanthropist, and it does nice things, and it's a little bit sad, and it's a little bit funny, and it's a little bit whimsical. The next doc that we're going to talk about is the exact opposite. It's about two women who were raped in Bosnia who took their pregnancies to term. And it's the exact opposite on so many levels. Bob Erb, we found in 2 days flat. We were on a plane where we were recording. We turned it around in like 4 days. The Sarajevo doc that you're going to hear, we took months. Laura O'Brien was working with me. I was going back to Sarajevo with Carol Off as a big project for CBC. We had both covered the war in Bosnia, so it was the 20th anniversary of the war in Bosnia, and I got it in my head that I really wanted to talk to a woman who was raped, who had become pregnant and took the baby to term. These women did not talk. And I remember covering these stories when I was there. It was hard then to get them to talk. So Laura made contact with a woman at AP in Sarajevo who was going to work with us and started making calls around. And the message was, none of these women talk. They have never talked on broadcast. Go away. And I said to Laura, we have time. This was, I think, before January, and we weren't going until the spring. We have time. Keep trying. We went back. Well, they went back, and the woman working with us went back again and again and again to find someone. She actually knew someone, but they were her friend and their kid didn't know, and we couldn't use that person. And in the end, we got not one woman, but two women. And it was 2 interviews done in translation, which is another whole thing. So this one is also narrated, but it's got much bigger chunks of these women telling their stories. And again, we're talking about documentaries. Obviously, there are other documentaries where there's no narration, where you just let the sound and the thing play out. But even in that, you're driving information and telling the story, and you use your clips as your narration, right? So your storytelling arc is always there. And in my case, it was also just in telling a story. So we can go back and forth between the two, but I'll get you to listen to the first tape of the first clip on this one.
We had always been neighbors. Then they came for us one day. We were in a stone house, hiding in the basement.
Safada is a big, methodical woman. Even before she begins to speak, she has brought us coffee. She's opened the window for the cigarette smoke. She settles into a chair on the 3rd floor of a home for abused women in Tuzla, in northeast Bosnia. She cleans here. What else would I do, she asks. And she begins.
The morning of May 25, a truck came, a yellow FAP truck, and some other vehicles. They started collecting people. People who could not climb on the trucks were shot on the spot. They took us to a house, they packed us into the house, and they continued collecting people from the area. In the end, they were around 450 people, including children and women. That's where real abuse began, and rapes.
She holds her cigarette, her big hands, on her belly, leaning back slowly in her chair, then moving forward, lost in thought.
They took me out on the second night, me and another woman, Fata. They took us to Hassan's house.
So, in writing this, I didn't talk at all about what happened to her. I wanted you to see her, but I wanted her to tell you and me what happened. So I wanted to describe her, but I didn't want to say she's got short brown hair and brown eyes. I didn't want to do that. So I was trying to figure out what could I do? How do you picture her? So I watched the way she was moving, right? She was a big woman, and she had her hands on her stomach. And I thought if I did that, you kind of picture a woman with a bit of a belly, and you can kind of picture her just kind of there. I wanted you to be there with her, but I wanted her to tell the story. So that's why you don't hear me say, much about what happened. We let her do that. And so she holds her cigarette, her large hands on her belly, leaning back slowly in her chair, then moving forward, lost in thought. Because I'm sort of transfixed by this woman. And I know she's going to tell me stuff that's hard for her to do. And I just want you to be with me as I listen to her and watch her, and that's why I chose to write to those clips in that way. Okay, the next one is the other woman, and, you'll hear.
Yasmina is not her real name. It's the one she's asked us to use. She's a smoker. She's got half a pack of Sarajevo Drina cigarettes next to her, and by the time we finish this conversation, she will have finished that one and started in on another. She peels the tiny barcode tag off her lighter, passing it back and forth between her fingers. And as she speaks, in a language I don't understand, her voice becomes more urgent. Her fingers become so frenzied that I'm uncomfortable. I know she's about to break.
I was raped by 5 Croats. I don't know even whose child she is.
And all the air goes out of the room.
Rekla sam tamo, kod nas je bio policijski sat. Ja sam imala u školu dosta društva, dosta svega.
One night, I met a girlfriend from school. She said, let's go for coffee, okay? Let's go for coffee. You don't really think it through. I went to a Croat cafe with her, and just as we walked in, they dragged me by my hand and threw me into a car that had been waiting in front of the cafe.
Okay, and she keeps going on. She talks about the rape. So a couple of things about this. Again, I'm watching her. We have spent a lot of time trying to get these women to talk to us. She's wary of us. She comes in, she starts to talk, and she does that whole thing with the lighter. And I am mesmerized. And so I'm trying to, again, put you there without telling you what she's going to tell you, and to try to get you to picture being in that room with her. So writing to that clip was just about setting you up to get you there. And that's what, in terms of what I drew on what bothered me, what I remembered about that. And when she's talking to me, I'm taking notes. Both of these women were done in translation, and I should point out, so the voice of the first woman was actually the woman who we worked with, who was doing the translation, a chunk of talk, and then she would translate, and she had a good voice for that. The voice of the second woman, Yasmina, who you heard, and these names, of course, have been changed, we hired an actress to do the voice for us because she was so mercurial and emotional in her conversation that we felt we needed to match it. And so we did it there. Laura picked clips immediately after a very 1.5 hour long conversation. She picked a chunk of clips, and we had them translated again and voiced again by somebody who was there listening right away, so that we kept all that. And that's what we basically blocked out that whole documentary within 2 days of doing it to make sure we had the right stuff. It's spare. It's just about keeping you there. It's about so that it's you could arguably say I didn't even need, and all the air goes out of the room, but I felt it so strongly because that was the point. You could just, she's talking, and then she just goes. That's right, because I'm there and I'm bringing you with me, and so we're there on a bit of a journey, right? And we're meeting these people, and what I'm trying to do is just kind of present them to you so that you can picture them in your mind. I mean, I feel really strongly that when we listen to anything on the radio, we don't actually hear it, we see it. And so what is it that we can use to make people see it? And so what is it that you see when you're there that you can then translate to your writing? And again, and how do you do that, and how do you keep it spare so that you don't intrude on their clips, but you enhance their clips? Constant. I mean, I will admit to you, the Drina cigarette thing is, if you worked in Sarajevo during the war, Drina cigarettes were the cigarette of choice, and they were so hard to get. The factory ran out of stuff, and they started using books, like then dictionaries, because they're fine paper, to roll the cigarettes. So I actually have cigarettes with, like an old Drina cigarette thing. The package is made out of a dictionary page, and it's got, it just happens to have I think it's an English and Polish dictionary. I don't know what it is, but it's got the word bloodless on it, which I always thought was amazing. That's my best souvenir of Sarajevo. So I have this thing about the Drina cigarette. So I noticed it anyway, but it's constant. I'm always taking notes, always, and then I'm looking back.
So you're actually writing there at the time?
Oh, yeah, I'm like listening, and I'm like, I might be doing this. Or I'll take notes after. I'll take notes like in and out of the place. I'll take notes on the way there. I mean, I'm working. Right? I'm not on vacation. I mean, I'm just firing on every cylinder, and I'm looking at her, and I'm really watching her. And, you know, with translation, you actually have more of an opportunity to do that because you don't know what they're saying. So what you're picking up on is their emotion, right? And you can learn a lot from what they do. And, I mean, I wasn't actually thinking, oh, watch how she moves her hands. You just couldn't miss this, right? Like, you're thinking, oh, my God, what is this woman doing with her hands, right? It's just like it was really, I mean, of all the people I've interviewed, in terms of somebody nervous when they're going to tell you something traumatic in their life, she really topped it. And so you couldn't help but notice it, but then you use it, right? And it's about use what you have. And so, and like you try to use those little bits of things to just help people see something. And sometimes it is the tiniest little things that if you write to that and keep spare on the other stuff, you don't have to write a whole bunch. You just have to write a little to fit in between, because you've got all this great clip of what the story they're telling, and you're trying to figure out, okay, how do you bring it to life? When I'm writing, I read out loud. I constantly, even when I'm writing the opening of The Current, I only write the opening of The Current. Somebody else writes all the other stuff. But I will read the opening of The Current several times as I go through. I might read a couple of lines. I might read, I'll go back and forth, because it's got to sound right? It's not good enough just to look at it with your eyes. It's got to sound right, and you've got to be able to spit it out. And sometimes the words that look good on a page, you can't actually speak to. And I really think that matters as you write into a clip too, right? So, and you know, you can introduce people lots of ways, but you can also like play with it a bit. And if you're going to play with it, it's always nice to talk. Because then you can see what really works as you play with it. So Safata is a big, methodical woman. It's not actually something I would normally say, but she just was so much, like she kind of went about her world like in that kind of like sort of methodical way. You could see that. You know, we hung out with her all day. She brought us to her house. You know, in the documentary, she introduces us to her son. She says, "Don't tell him you know." Okay, like, because he doesn't know. And I'm going, he's on the internet all day. Can't he Google, like, if we do this? No, he can't. He won't. But, you know, I mean, so they tell you little things, and then you have to pick up on it. And you might have questions that come to you as you're doing it, so you need to write that down, right? Because you're going to get one shot. Journalistically, there have been things I haven't put to air because I can't prove them. When you're working in a war zone, right? Somebody can tell you about something the other side did, and if you can't prove it, you can't just like go with it, right? I think when it comes to especially war, there's stuff I'll take you to the wire. So probably, in this case, I don't think there was anything we didn't use for that reason. There have been times in TV where we, like, people don't want to show stuff. We now give all sorts of warnings. This is disturbing. I actually don't agree with any of that, I'll be honest. I think that you should show people how bad war is, and you should take it, and this is what I used to always do. I covered a lot of suicide bombings. I used to take it right to the point where I thought you couldn't look anymore, and then I cut it. But I take it right up to the, because it's, I really believe that if you're going to want to show people what somebody's going through, you take it right to that point where it does become a little bit uncomfortable, and then you cut it. So, or if it's intrusive. So I guess that's your question. If, yeah, I can't think of anything, and I don't think even in this case, we might have taken out a little bit, but actually we left in, Safata says she's really graphic about the rape, and we kept it in, actually. We thought about it, but it's her telling the story. But I think that's what you do. You kind of, for your own sensibility, but, I remember when 9/11 happened, and they showed pictures of people jumping out of those buildings, and they weren't identifiable, but they stopped running them in the United States and here in Canada and CBC and everywhere else. If that had happened in another country, would we have not put it on the air? I'm guessing we would have, yeah? And so sometimes I think our sensibilities are, I think they're misplaced. I think sometimes we need to one of the reasons war gets whitewashed and people get bored with it and people's traumas get whitewashed is because we don't make it real. My view is that you don't honor them by pretending it wasn't as bad, right? But you also take your cue from them. So if they're clearly embarrassed by something and want to talk around it, then maybe you'll talk around it with them, and then you can say they can't even go there. That's where you use your writing, right? Or it's like where you can kind of hint at something. I can tell you that in an interview once, we did an interview with a woman whose daughter had taken her own life in Halifax, and it was a pre-tape, because you should pre-tape those things, and she was talking in great detail about her daughter, and I said to her, "You found her." And then she proceeded to tell me, "Yes, I found her at the top of the stairs, and I cut her down." And she actually said this stuff, and we left it in. And somebody got really upset with us. But I took my cue from her. I knew I rightly or wrongly, and you can dispute whether I really knew this, I just felt she wanted to tell me. And we left part of it in. We didn't, we took part of it out too. But so sometimes you have to take your cue from them, and that you have to be laser focused on them to sense what you think they're trying to tell you. No, I haven't had that. I'll tell you that the woman we call Yasmina, I think she was really wary of me and of us, and felt okay for telling it, but it was a hard thing. And I think that's the thing you have to know too, right? You can't, I sit there with these women, and like our first full day in Sarajevo, we go to Tuzla, we get one story, then we go to Zenica, we get another story the next day. And we're reeling from these stories, right? But I know that by the very fact of taking these women through this story, I have, if not traumatized them, I have at least unsettled them deeply. And I know that, and I have to acknowledge that to them in conversation at the end, and in the way that I talk to them. So you let them go on, you roll too much tape if you have to, because you have to be respectful of them, and you have to really thank them after, and you have to say, I know what I put you through, because you put them through something to tell their story. And, it's always questionable, is telling their story worthwhile? I think it is worthwhile to tell their stories. I think this was going on right when the war in Syria began. And we knew this was happening. This happens to women in every war, and we knew this was happening to women in Syria. And you think, okay, 20 years after war, they still live with it. They look at their kid, they live with it. And it's the other side, though. They're glad they have that kid. So all of that informs that answer. Yeah, again, you can fix almost everything because everybody has a story, and that's where you see they don't have to be who you want them to be. And that's why Bob Erb is such a great character. He's a guy who rambles, like he really rambled, and he did, but that doesn't make him a bad person just because he doesn't answer questions in nice, neat little sentences the way that, you know, an expert on something would answer, right? So if you conform to them, they're actually not going to be bad tape, no matter who they are. Everybody's got a story to tell, and the question is, how do you get them to tell it? And if they have a hard time telling it, then use what you have. Again, if you're going to take that tape back and cut it in some way, whether it's going to be with a narrative or whether it's going to be your way of using music and sound. So they all start from the place that no matter what you get, it's going to be good enough. Now, do your homework and make sure you ask all the questions. And if they're really hesitating and not having a hard time telling you the story, say to them, you know, it's like, be honest with them. Say, wow, I would have thought you would be able to tell me this. It's still hard, isn't it? Like, take your cues from them. Really listen to them. What are they telling you by not telling you? Can you ask them about that? Because when you do, maybe you'll get something. If they're hesitant, maybe put them at ease. Maybe change the subject for a bit and then go back. Something like, depending on, again, now, you know, everybody's like the time they have for you and all of that matters, but take your cues from them. I think sometimes what happens is we, and I know this because I've gone to so many places where I think, oh, I'm going to get this. That's not what you get, you know, and if you're a print journalist, you can fake it. If you're a broadcast journalist, you got to have it on tape. And so work with what you have, and you'll start to see that there's actually a lot there. And then write around it, but maybe write around it in a different way. So you meet a guy like Bob Erb, who's got a good story, but, you know, is like, well, he's like on his fourth joint. He's talking a mile a minute, but he's got interesting things to say. So fade him up and down. Let him talk. Fade him up and down, and just say, he points to this, and then fade him back up, and he's there, right? Because sometimes in that long sort of rambling, you know, you're going to lose an audience if you just run the whole thing. But if you just like interject a little bit, then you bring them right back, focus them right back. Does that make sense? Sometimes it works in a documentary, depending the kind of documentary, but sometimes people introduced by people by just saying who they are and giving their title. And I think you could work a little harder with it and make it, you know, do something more with it. Or if you say, so-and-so says ABC, and then they say ABC, you know, better to say, so-and-so is conflicted, and let them talk, you know, or that's not what I got with so-and-so. It depends on, you know, I'm not big on inserting myself, except I did in both places, right? So I would say, be careful how you insert yourself. And really be spare, and don't get caught up. The best piece of advice any producer ever gave me was years ago in television. I started this, and she looked at my script and she said, so you're going to write a poem or you're going to write me a documentary? Like, because I was like, you know, like lose some of those lines, right? Like, just just, you know, sometimes your best line is the one you have to kill, because it's not going to fit with them and that kind of thing. But as for, you know, you can have your own list of don'ts, and then when you have to break the rules, break the rules. Again, if you listen to the tape and let the tape kind of rule you, and really think about how you're going to tell that story. Don't be afraid to move things around. So we didn't think, we actually start the Bob Erb thing with these women who are rollerbladers in a market. And they talk about him before we get to him, because we thought, you know, I thought we'd just start, oh, hi, I'm Bob Erb in the driveway. But it just wasn't strong enough. So then it worked if you say, oh, yeah, well, we know who, like all these other people knew who he was. And so when we went into like the town market on a Saturday, and there's tons of people around, and we asked people if they knew who he was. And half of them did. So we used that, and then we had him talk, right?
Did you do that because you recognized when you met him that he couldn't start his own segment?
Well, we were fishing still. We were, you know, I mean, this was a fishing doc versus one where we knew what we were, like roughly what we were getting. Although with the women, we knew sort of what we were getting. We knew that would be willing to talk. But the other one was, we knew there was this guy who had given a lot of money to a lot of people. He also had ownership in a hemp store, and I forget what it was called. It was a great name. I'll find it for you. But and the first time we went to see them, oh yeah, Deviant Fibers, that's it. The first time we went into Deviant Fibers, we went, okay, we're not sure there's anyone to interview here. And then we went back and we spent a little more time talking, and we met this wonderful woman, Mary Jo, who's a friend of Bob's who worked in the store, who he gave a truck to. And we kept talking to her. Again, everybody has a story, right? So we find out that this is really great for her because you know what she does in her spare time? She helps homeless people move. Because when homeless or people who are really poor who get evicted, like they live in rooming houses, because when they leave, they can't take anything with them because they've got no transportation. They don't have a car. They have they put stuff in a little suitcase and a garbage bag. But she can move their stuff. So she works with young people and she does all this great stuff. And she was doing all these great things. And suddenly she had a truck. She could put all this stuff in her truck. So it was like, who knew, right? It's just because you go in the first time and you go, oh, hi, how are you? And you know this guy. But then you say, well, we're actually doing a story here. And, oh, well, you should know this, you should know that. Everybody has a story. But if you go in with your preordained ideas, you won't hear their story. And if you go in with the idea that, you know what, this is kind of this is an interesting place. And this is an interesting person. If he cared so much to give money to people in this town, there must be something really special going on here. We've got to find it. How do you find it? Just ask questions. I mean, we hired an actor, right? And that's what we often do now with some documentaries because it makes a difference right away. If it's a male voice, it's a male voice doing it. But also, if you can't do that, then get the translation in chunks, redo the translation, and find somebody who can do it for you, and produce it. You literally have to produce the translation of those clips so that it has that flow, right? And that they're listening to it as opposed to just reading something on a paper. The whole point is to lift it off the paper, right? For everybody. But that means you're going to have to produce it. And maybe it won't be perfect, but it'll be a lot better if you say, well, can you do it this way? And that's where it comes in if you're watching them, right? So if you're talking to an elder who's got a story to tell, watch their face. And watch how they, watch for little things that maybe you can use then in that narrative after. Right? Because people give away little things about, maybe when you first ask about it, watch the look on their face when they first hear the question translated, or something like that. When you think that you're being a little too clever, and when you think that it's becoming too obvious, then you need to pull it back. If it's really clever, it's going to be seamless. So that doesn't mean you can't use certain words or even certain descriptions, but it just has to flow. And I mean, we all benefit from colleagues, right? Run it by someone. In the same way that, well, think about how you use quotes in print, right? I mean, the bottom line is you can tell a story for any medium. You just have to conform to the medium a little bit. So you think how you would use the quotes, or think how you would describe something. And if you can do that with sound, because sound is also a clip, it doesn't have to be an actual speaking thing, right? So I will also listen for that kind of thing. I'll listen for the sound, for interesting sound. And so, you don't have to say the birds are chirping. You can make the birds chirp if they're chirping, right? You can do that kind of thing. So think of your sound as your words, and then do it that way. And when you think, oh, I'm being a little too whatever, pull it back and see how it makes you feel. See if you feel better about it.